Everyone, my name is Karen Dick, and I'm a legal education trainer at CLEO, Community Legal Education Ontario. So thank you so much for participating today in our webinar about income benefits during COVID, namely what's new with EI, what's left of the Canada Recovery benefits, what has ended, and what do the temporary rules look like? And also of dire importance to many, how do the benefits interact with each other? And where might there be clawbacks that will result in significant reductions for many of your clients, many whom are low-income people. So we're lucky to have such an expert panel with us here today. Thank you all for being here. We have Regina David, who's a paralegal at West Scarborough Community Legal Services. Reggie's also the co-chair of the Community Legal Clinics EI Working Group. And also many of you probably know Reggie as a longtime community organizer and advocate for workers in our province. We have Laurel Ritchie. Welcome, Laurel, from the Good Jobs for All Coalition. Laurel is a co-chair of the EI Working Group. We've have the link here if you're interested, but the Good Jobs for All Coalition is an alliance of community, labor, social justice, youth, and environmental organizations in Toronto. And it was formed in order to discuss and strategize on how to improve living and working conditions through a sustainable economy, strong public services, equity, and decent work for all. We also have John Stapleton. Welcome, John. John is a writer, instructor, and a former innovation fellow with the Metcalf Foundation. John has worked for the Ontario government for 28 years in the areas of social assistance policy and was research director for the task force on modernizing income security for working age adults in Toronto. John teaches on public policy for community advocates like yourselves and is extensively published in local and national media. So Open Policy Ontario is the social policy consultancy of John's right now, and we have that link for you here as well. Before we begin, we did want to acknowledge that there's a lot to cover around income benefits at this point in the pandemic, and things are constantly changing. So today we'll have time to give an overview of what's available now, what clawbacks or overpayment issues you need to be aware of. John is going to present a timeline of what you can expect in the coming months and into 2022. So this will be very helpful in terms of helping you prepare for what your clients will be experiencing in the coming months. CLEO will very likely do a follow-up on income benefits early in the new year to keep you up to speed as things change and move. We also thought it would be a good strategy for you to think through if your organization may want to assign one or two reps, maybe those of you who are here today, to be the point person at your organization to keep up to date on income assistance issues, to inform your work, to stay prepared for what's coming, important for how you plan your work and your support strategies. And so throughout the webinar, we've listed resources for you and on the final slides. So please, you can subscribe, you can connect to these trusted sources of information. I think, as John said, we'll likely to be dealing with issues related to the pandemic benefits well into 2023. And so we'll do our part to keep you informed and up to date. But it might be good if someone keeps their head around that, as things will constantly be changing. And in terms of your work and strategies as well. So before we begin, I wanted to do land acknowledgement to situate us. So we acknowledge that since time immemorial, the land on which we live and work has been the home and traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Haudenosaunee, and Wyandot, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis relatives. CLEO's work is carried out across the many traditional territories of this land that is also known as Ontario. We acknowledge our privilege as well as our role in the unjust systems of colonization, which we recognize as an ongoing process today. CLEO commits to challenging all anti-Indigenous racism. We also pledge to take concrete steps to be accountable to the calls to action outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Report. And we wanted to say that for those of you who want to learn more or want to take action, we've added some slides in our resource section for you, which we'll cover at the end. So finally, I will hand the floor over to our first speakers, Laurel Ritchie and Regina David.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Reggie and I are going to make a presentation that will begin, first of all, with a very quick review of the current income benefits. There obviously are various income benefits for people who are working age adults in this province, and in particular, those who have faced unemployment or a reduction in their work and income due to COVID. But as you will, I'm sure, know, a lot of these are quite limited. Some of them are short-term ones, including the 3-day paid infectious disease emergency leave, currently scheduled to end on December 31st. They have extended that once. We'll see if they do it again. There are other longer-term benefits available here in this province. First of all, Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support Program, the ODSP program, and the Canada Pension Plan disability benefits. I see some questions in the chat room. Don't worry about taking notes. As Karen said, you will be getting a copy of this PowerPoint when we're finished, along with the other documents, and it'll be easier to understand and make the hot links to the ones that we provide when you get it. So what Reggie and I are going to do is focus on two of the federal income benefits. First of all, employment insurance, and secondly, Canada Recovery benefits, which Reggie is going to deal with in some more detail. So first of all, 2020. Next slide. '20 was actually a watershed year. When we started the year, we thought we were going to be spending some time marking the 80th anniversary of Canada's Unemployment Insurance Act. It was first introduced in 1935, but it actually became law as the Unemployment Insurance Act in 1940. Later renamed in 1996 as the Employment Insurance Act. But events overtook us, and 2020 also was the beginning in approximately March of a global COVID-19 pandemic. And so that changed all of our lives, and it certainly changed the benefit landscape. And the other thing to note about this is that, maybe ironically, one of the things we encountered immediately starting, some were encountering it in certain communities even earlier than March 11th, when it was officially declared. But by March and April, we were seeing the kinds of widespread unemployment and layoffs that gave rise to unemployment insurance in the 1930s during the Depression. In any event, by April in 2020, well over a third of workers were either unemployed or working below half of what they normally would in terms of hours and income. Next. So if we think of the different, 2020 responses. There, okay. So if we think of the waves of COVID that we've had, they correspond in many ways to the waves of the benefit rewrites that we've been living with. The first wave was in the spring of 2020. In immediate response, there were emergency benefits, the famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, CERB benefit, as well as some temporary EI measures. And by September, there was a kind of optimism then that we were going to avoid any further waves. When it became clear that that wasn't going to happen so quickly, things changed yet again. In any event, by September, the government was moving into what they called transition stage benefits. And what they did principally is they enhanced the EI rules temporarily, so that a lot of the big majority of CERB recipients, claimants, would qualify for EI and transfer over. And the 3 Canada Recovery benefits were brought in to provide support for people who still didn't qualify for EI, but there were stricter rules than with the original CERB. Next one, enhance. Yeah, thanks. So those, at that time, the enhanced EI temporary rules included things like reducing the qualifying hours such that anybody who had some work time who had at least 120 hours was going to qualify for EI, and that rule applied across the country. They also they waived the 1-week waiting period. They extended the duration for everybody across the country, no matter how many hours they had, no matter where they lived, to 50 full weeks, like a year. And they set up for the first time a minimum benefit, which was equal to the CERB benefit, $500 weekly. There were other changes, but those were the main ones. Okay, so moving on now to 2021. Next slide. By then, it became clear that we were not going to avoid further waves of COVID, and the public became concerned. And so the government did a couple of things. First of all, they extended the transition measures that had been announced earlier that were supposed to be ending. They extended them into the spring of this year. And they also added 2 weeks to the recovery sickness benefits for a total of 4. Then in April, it became clear that, again, we were in for further COVID consequences, and there were additional extensions announced. But at the same time, the government wanted to, they said, signal that they were moving into a wind-up phase for COVID benefits. The most obvious example is that what had been a $500 minimum benefit, subject to taxation, was reduced to $300. They did that, announced that first for the recovery benefit, but in short order extended that to EI, which, as I said, they were kind of keeping them in line with each other. So the minimum EI benefit also was reduced to $300 by the end of the summer. So just very quickly, what are the current qualifying rules? And I want to emphasize these are still temporary. They're the rules for the next year. They began at the end of September and they will continue until September 25th, 2022. The qualifying hours have been increased from 120 hours as they were before during the first waves of COVID, but they are not as high as they are in the Act itself. It's just a flat 420 hours for any kind of benefit, and that includes parental and sick benefits from EI. Normally, the hours varied between 420 and 700 hours. Just to make a note that when we went into COVID in March 2020, all the big cities in Canada would have required 700 hours. And that's how tough that hours hurdle can be. And there are still other flexibilities that will continue for the next year on qualifying, but there is no 120-hour qualifying rule anymore. Current duration rules, and again, for the next year until next September, it no longer is the flat 50 weeks across the board, across the country. It is a calculation, as it used to be, based on each worker's actual insured hours and the regional unemployment rate where they live, with a range, a minimum of 14 on one hand and a maximum of 45 weeks at the other end. There are some seasonal extensions in some very limited regions in the country. For the current month, and that means until this weekend, November 7th to December 4th, there's some examples here of what the durations are. And you can see there's differences in the range of entitlements as between Sudbury, Toronto, Kingston, Windsor. And on the PowerPoint, we've provided a hot link to the regional rates, which you can use at any time to see what the current month is. The next changeover will be this Sunday, and we'll see then what the requirements are for new claims beginning in the month of December into early January. So we've lost for now, we have lost that 50-week across the countries. The current benefit rates have reverted to the normal 55% of earnings. There is an exception for claims that started between September and November 20th. Those claims will get a minimum, the $300 minimum for the duration of their claim. But a claim that starts, for example, November 25th will only have the usual 55% of earnings. And there are a number of things that are no longer there, like the 1-week waiting period. What's next? There is actually a bill in front of Parliament today being debated, C2, which we hoped would have more than it does. It doesn't have much. Reggie will say something about that. We have to get ready. I know it seems a long way off, but it takes many months to make legislative changes for permanent improvements. And we need them to start moving on that immediately. And on the next slide, I'm not going to get into the details here. We've listed some of the improvements that are needed for longer term reform. Many of these are things that we've been advocating for years. They all proved themselves important during COVID, but they are at the best of times important. And we're looking for a new government contribution, because right now only workers and employers pay for those premiums that cover all these benefits. And again, I'm not going to get into detail, but the next slides here cover an issue which I know will be active for some of you, which is people who have chosen not to vaccinate, even if their workplace has a mandatory policy or there's a government policy in place. We've provided some resources here, which you can review. And those resources under other, next slide, sorry, Reggie. And then next, that's what appears in the government's explanation. And then some further resources, including CLEO's Steps to Justice materials and the Ontario Ministry of Health guidelines on what constitutes a medical exemption, and the Ontario Human Rights Commission guidance on what qualifies for any exemption from the vaccine mandates. Okay, Reggie.
Thank you, Laurel. Now I will be discussing other benefit support available to workers who don't qualify for EI. I will only focus around the new changes. First of all, Canada Recovery Benefit. CRB was given to workers who didn't qualify for EI and aren't employed or self-employed for reason related to COVID, or their income had reduced to 50% due to COVID. Workers who had recently ended their EI benefit were able to access this benefit as well. Retroactive applications are allowed until December 2022. What does this mean? Applicants who did not apply on time can only go back and request benefit for 60 days from the date of benefit period's end. The 60 days limitation hurt workers and who didn't apply benefit on time. We have seen that some of the workers have lost benefit due to the 60 days restriction. Unfortunately, CRB ended on October 23rd, 2021. And even though pandemic has not ended, this has affected close to 1 million vulnerable workers who are still juggling to pay bills. As Laurel said, government currently is proposing some changes to recovery benefits through Bill C2, but it does not propose any extension to CRB. Next is caregiver benefit. Who is eligible for this benefit? If you are unable to work at least 50% of your schedule work week because you are caring for a family member affected by COVID. This could also include schools and daycare and care facilities closure. And if you have to take time off to provide care for your family. The Bill C2 proposed extension, extension of this recovery benefit until May 7, 2021. It also, add 2 more weeks to the current 52 weeks maximum per household, which mean workers may, eligible for the total of 44 weeks if the C2, Bill C2 passes. The 500 is the weekly rate workers will receive. This is before tax. The Bill C2 is expected to pass in December. This is about the caregiver benefit. The next is sick benefit. Sick benefit is with Canada Recovery Sick Benefit. The CRSB gives income support to employed and self-employed individuals who are unable to work at least 50% of their scheduled work week because they have affected by COVID, or their doctors or employers have recommended them to be isolation due to COVID. Again, the Bill C2 proposed also extension on this benefit as well until May 7, 2022. It also add another 2 more weeks of benefit. So if the bill has passed, workers will qualify for a total of 6 weeks. The 6 weeks is not enough. Workers are getting sick often and or asked to be isolated multiple times due to COVID-19. This benefit really need to be extended further. The next benefit is workers lockdown benefit. The government is proposing this benefit through Bill C2. If it is passed, workers may able to access this benefit, and this benefit would only apply of event of future government proposed regional lockdown. And the proposed benefit would be $300 a week and available until May 7, 2022. It will only apply to workers who are not able to work at all due to lockdown. Again, currently, there is no lockdown in any of the region in Canada. The bill also proposed that these benefits would not be available to workers who refuse COVID vaccine. Resource and advocacy. We know that continuing this service, contacting Service Canada is not an easy during this time. However, some of the unresolved issue can be addressed by sending a message through service request link below. You could see that I highly recommend that if you need to talk to a Service Canada agent, follow this link and you will able to, reach them within 48 hours. We have also giving some of the other resources that might help you if you have any questions about EI, and you may want to visit this link as well. The Mobilizing for Change. The current EI system has to be fixed to be more inclusive and address the needs of workers. Both Community Legal Clinic EI Working Group and the Good Jobs for All Coalition EI Working Group are part of a campaign calling immediate action to extend the recovery benefits and make permanent EI improvement. And you could also, if you would like to see what other recommendation we have recommended or to see our submission, you could also visit this link and find out that as well. And moreover, Justice for Workers is organizing 2 emergency phone action on this issue as well. And if you would like to join, please join them on December 8th to take action. And the informations are on this link as well. And what are some of the benefit? Here are some information, maybe other benefits available in the province for individual. For example, Ontario Work and ODSP. This will provide you some information about how much an individual may be qualifying for shelter and basic needs under social assistance. I will pass now to Karen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reggie and Laurel. We do have some questions that have come in for you. There's a few clarifications that people are asking for. Reggie, maybe you can answer this one. Are the CRB applications open until December 2021 or December 2022?
The CRB applications is open until December 2022.
Okay, and another clarification. Can you confirm if retroactive applications are allowed until December 22nd or December 2022?
They will only go back 60 days from the period that they may qualify. So it's really, having the whole 2022 is not going to help. If workers are really, really late, they will only go back for 60 days.
Yeah, if we can just maybe reiterate that the benefit ended as it stands on October 23rd. And if you count 60 days, that's kind of roughly why you end up with December 22. And so it's confusing, but it's December 22 or 22nd year 2021. We're not talking about the year 2022.
Okay, great clarification. One of the questions that came in was like what's available to someone that got pregnant while they were on EI. Laurel, do you want to answer that one? What's available? What benefits are available, if any?
Well, if we're talking about somebody who is not currently on, they will have to meet the 420-hour requirement as it stands, assuming that they want to move on to maternity or parental benefits. Or even sick benefits, because you can do those in combination sometime over the next year. And in that case, if they're pregnant now, then they would be applying while the rule is 420 hours.
And Reggie, maybe you can answer this one. Are employees entitled to the paid infectious disease emergency leave benefits for time off related to vaccination symptoms?
Yes, they should able to apply for that benefit, and also they should talk to the employer about it.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in earlier was, can you apply for EI without a record of employment? And what is the deadline for applying? Reggie, you want to answer that one?
Sure. It is very important to apply right away when there is no work for 5 continuing working days. And yeah, definitely you could apply without record employment, and then provided once you get it, if you don't have it, you could always let Service Canada agent know there is a missing ROE form that you may able to fill it out and follow up on that. And we see that many workers are applying late, and applying late mean they could also lose benefit, because from their last day of work, they have 4 weeks to apply. If they don't apply within that 4 weeks time, they could lose benefit unless you ask to antedate the claim and you have a good reason for lateness.
Thanks, Reggie. Laurel, here's a question for you. We have a worker being asked to repay CERB from 2020. Are there ways to challenge this? They want the initial $2,000 payment back.
Yeah, John may be touching on some of this. There are a bunch of letters going to be going out to people in the coming weeks who received essentially an overpayment because of an overlap between CERB and their return to work. There is a form, and we've provided in I think in the main deck, Karen, there is a link there for you can apply for what they call taxpayer relief, and you can explain, this is probably going to be a combination of explaining the circumstances of COVID, but undue hardship in terms of finances. Anyway, let me not say too much more about that, because John is going to touch on that issue, I believe.
Okay, thanks for that. And we do have that form in the resource section, so everyone will get a copy of that. Reggie or Laurel, this question is for you. If a young person were to participate in an employment program that provided a stipend equal to 12 hours a week, minimum wage, would that make them ineligible for any of the income benefits discussed today?
Are we talking about, when you said a stipend, is this in the form of like an honorarium? Is that what we're talking about?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that should be covered. And again, I think John is going to touch on some of this.
Okay. Let's see here. So just looking at the questions.
Just while you're looking at those, Karen, again, when you get this, it'll be on slide 20, resources for advocacy. Again, there are links there to Service Canada's Q&A pages for EI and also for the recovery benefits. And while not exhaustive, they're actually, I think most advocates would say they're pretty good in laying out the kinds of questions people have and giving answers. You may not like all the answers, but they're pretty good in laying out the questions and answers.
Great. So again, either Reggie or Laurel, will there be compensation for COVID survivors for long-term health issues, breathing issues, damage to vocal cords, like permanent damage? Are there any benefits that will be available to these folks?
One thing is under EI, the sick benefit. If they meet all the requirements, they could apply for EI sick benefit, which is currently only 15 weeks. And also maybe looking into other benefit, like if it is the disability is permanent, Canada disability benefit, CPPD, Canada Pension Disability Benefit, or even ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program. Those are the things I could actually think of. Laurel, do you think any other benefit?
Yeah, I mean, if it's really dramatic in terms of the impacts, you might have to be looking at something like CC Canada Pension Plan Disability. The people I know of who are in this situation, though, it's more complicated than that, because they can have long periods of time when they're perfectly able to work, and then a devastating setback, and it comes in waves. So I think this is one of those big issues that hope some people are already speaking up, speaking out to the media about this issue. There may need to be more flexibility in some of the programs that exist, including EI sick benefits, which really aren't built for this kind of situation. And groups have, as you know, been advocating for things like CERB amnesty and so on. There's a lot of groups that didn't exist 2 years ago that are active on these issues. So I guess supporting people to get their voices heard, both in the media and maybe some concerted writing of letters to local members of parliament, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's maybe we have time for this one last question, which relates to that is, do you think there'll be an opportunity for advocacy to raise rates for OW, ODSP based on what the benefit rates have been given to folks throughout COVID? And now this might be something that John is also going to cover, but I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that at this time.
I know John is really working on this issue deeply, and advocacy work is really needed for any changes. As Laurel said, there are so many people have been left behind, and people are juggling also paying basic bills, and so in any area, even social assistance and improving EI and any sort of a benefit, advocacy work is really, really important. And I think I will just leave to John, because since he's going to cover most of that advocacy work that he was involved in, the social assistant, he will be the better person to answer that.
So I think on that note, we'll hand over the floor to you, John. And yeah, if you can just start sharing your screen. Thank you so much, Reggie and Laurel, for those responses.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen now. I'm hoping, oh, here we go. I have to stop sharing because the the slides will not advance, which is a common problem. So I will try that again. So you see here, move to the slideshow and go from the beginning, and I'm hoping they will now advance, and yes, they will. Okay, so what you see on your screen is Robert Borden, who was one of our most racist prime ministers, and I got a mask over him, so he is not able to say anything. So let's start into an overview of pandemic clawbacks. And what I'm going to talk about is social assistance, because we all know about the social assistance pandemic clawbacks that, and I'll run through that briefly in terms of what the provinces and territories did and didn't do. Also talking then about and covering in a little bit more detail the guaranteed income supplement clawback, which was quite unexpected and very much not in keeping with what federal policy was as it related to the provinces and territories, and we'll get into that. And also, some of you may or may not know that there is a subsidized or public or community housing, whatever we call it, rent-geared income housing, where we will start to see, and we've already seen in Ontario and some other provinces and territories, increases in rents based on the CERB. And also an emerging issue starting this year, especially in July, was the refundable tax credits, like the Canada Child Benefits, which got CCB, and the Canada Workers Benefit, etc. The CERB and CRB also affect those benefits too. And I think what we first need to understand is, and I don't mind, I know Laurel said not to take notes, but my slides are quite imperfect, and I'm going to say some things that are not on these slides. So if you want to pull out a pen or paper or your laptop or phone, please feel free to do so, because I'm going to say a few things that aren't on the slides. But Canada Revenue Agency is an interesting body, because it's an agency of government. In other words, it does business on its own. Yes, it reports to the government, but it does three big things. And from 1917 through to 1978, all it did was collect taxes, basically. Then in 1978, we started paying money through our income security system. We started to make the tax system our delivery venue of choice. And every single new program since 1978 in the income security realm has been paid through the Canada Revenue Agency, or Revenue Canada, as we used to call it. It became an agency in 1999, 2000, right at the turn of the millennium. And what it has also done since about 2001 or 2 has become the largest single public benefit collection agency in the country. So it has three roles, and some would say, and I would certainly say this, that those roles are somewhat in conflict. So when we start to do something, when we decided to mount the largest single income security program in Canada, just for reference, before the CERB and the CRB, our income security programs paid about $195 billion to $200 billion to all Canadians. And we mounted on top of that a program that spent over $80 billion, the largest single income security program in history in Canada. And now we are dismantling the largest single income security system in Canada. And so it goes without saying that when you mount the largest program in the history of the country and then you dismantle it, a whole lot of things are going to happen. And you've certainly heard, I think, in some of that from Reggie and Laurel, and it's important. I'm going to do another thing that Laurel did, and that is some of the slides where I get into the weeds. I'm going to let you have those, and when you run out of things on Netflix to watch on a Saturday night, well, you you can bring out these slides and go through some of the examples that I have here, so, because a lot of them are complicated. So I'll try to top line things. So what's a pandemic benefit clawback? You have to remember that most of the pandemic benefits paid to individuals were not clawed back, and they were also small when we think of them in comparison to the CERB and the CRB. We paid a special benefit of $600 to people with disabilities if they received special, if they had met one of the federal definitions from veterans, CPPD, and the disability tax credit. We paid a special benefit to GST credit recipients. We paid a couple of times. We paid some money out to child benefits. So we did that five times, and we paid them as refundable credits. And what's really important from a CRA and from a taxation point of view is that refundable credits are not entered in any place on your personal tax form. But then once we get to the CERB and the CRB, because they are taxable and they are recorded in the first section of the personal income tax return, somewhere around line 130, because they're considered other income other than employment. Okay, so the employment income is the T4, but the T4A, the important thing is that T4A income is considered other income. And it's those benefits, the CERB, that have been clawed back are charged in 4 important ways over the course of the pandemic. So remember, all of the other benefits, like the child benefits, the special payments to OAS and GIS recipients, GSTC, none of those benefits were clawed back, and they were uncontroversial, but they were also small in relationship to the CERB and the CERB. So what is a pandemic benefit clawback? It's when it's clawed back from income or social assistance benefit at the provincial or territorial level. So a lot of that has already taken place because social assistance benefits are paid in real time based on monthly eligibility for assistance. With few exceptions, we look at social assistance on an ongoing current time basis. So as people got the CERB and the CRB that was clawed back from their benefits across Canada, with the exception of BC, which you'll see in a moment from my maps. But when it was clawed back from the federal guaranteed income supplement, what happened is that the money was paid out to about 88,000 GIS recipients, but nothing happened. And that's because it's not until next year, or in this case in 2020, where people did their 2020 tax return in early 2021, that they discovered in July that in fact that their GIS was going to be clawed back. The third, and very, very important, is that the CERB and CRB is made subject to rent increases in community, call it social housing, public housing, RGI housing, because housing authorities use the personal income tax system to count income charged for rent geared to income housing. So in other words, their usual rule is 30% of available income, including pandemic benefits that are taxable, is used to determine rents. Now, what happened at the same time as the pandemic occurred and the pandemic benefits came out, we also had a large scale change in the way public housing rents were assessed, and they moved over to the income tax form. So you can start to see, here's the pandemic benefits on line 130 of the tax form, and now we're charging rents based on RGI housing based on the tax form. So what we have in Ontario, after a few people had massive rental increases, and a few seniors had rental increases, the province of Ontario declared a moratorium on rent increases in public housing until, wait for it, January 2022. And that's when you're going to start to see the rent increases. Now, I'll just make another comment here on RGI housing. We have 47 different municipal housing authorities across Ontario, the what we call the CMSMs, the housing managers, and the social services managers. And those, they have the ability, they have the discretion to look at current income. So in other words, they could see that somebody got the pandemic benefits in 2019, in 2020, in 2020 and 2021. And they could either look at the, go by the book, look at the income from the tax return, and therefore charge 30% of those benefits as rent, or they could also choose to look at income that's current income, which doesn't include those benefits because they ended on October 23rd, as Laurel said. So I think what we are going to see come January 2022, and as these start to trickle in, you are going to see everybody doing everything. We're going to see people having massive rent increases. We're going to see some housing authorities using their discretion to not charge those rent increases. And of course, they're under the gun to get revenue. So there's also that involved. And in the case of social assistance recipients, because the RGI scales for social assistance recipients are so low, for example, you get an ODSP single recipient that will only be paying, $129 or $139 in rent, even though they have a $497 shelter component. For social assistance recipients, largely, not in all cases, but largely the shelter component within social assistance will be robust enough to pay for the housing increase that comes through counting the pandemic benefits from CERB and CRB. But they won't in all cases, because other clients have work income, they have other income from other sources, and some who got the full pandemic benefits, they might go above the shelter component. And that's where it becomes really important to think about the seniors again, because the seniors don't have a shelter component. They have OAS and they have GIS. And so if their rent goes up, it comes out of the OAS and GIS. So my prediction is that they are going to be the ones that are most likely well off. So I think you can start to see wherever you are from around the province, you're going to see all sorts of different things. So that your advocacy is clear in getting your housing authority to look at present income and not count the income in the previous year, whether they say that they have to, whether they must, or they made the decision to do so. They do have the wiggle room and the discretion to count current income, especially if that income is lower. The fourth major clawback benefit of clawback benefits is that when you add the CERB and CRB on line 130 of the tax form, refundable credits are income tested. But it's unlikely, because the first 32,000 of income is exempt for the Canada Child Benefit. It's unlikely that you will see poor families with children see any, they might have very, very small, almost tiny clawbacks. And there's certainly been some press on this, but the press that I've seen is people who are actually with incomes that might be in the $60,000 to $70,000 range. And when you add another $12,000 to that, then they are going to see reductions in their Canada Child benefits. And you might also see people who at the Canada Workers Benefit, you add another $12,000 to that in the form of the CRB, and then you're going to see reductions in the Canada Workers Benefit. But for the child benefits, it's going to be two sets of people, those with modest incomes as opposed to those living in poverty. And secondly, people who have more than two children or more. It's unlikely to affect people with one child, but it's 2 children or more. And if you look up this, if you Google all this and see the various reports of people who have talked about having their child benefits clawed back, you'll usually see that they have 3 children, and they either don't discuss their income, or they're of modest means, but they are not poor. So let's get into what I really want to get into here is the pandemic clawback timeline. So you can briefly review, this is 2021, what happened in April 30th. We know that June 1st, all taxes had to be filed for GIS recipients and most Canadians. July 1st is the first time we saw the mail go out to all the CCB and the Canada Workers Benefits recipients, and especially Guaranteed Income Supplement recipients. And they saw for the first time around July 15th, holy cow, their benefits are really going to go much lower. So why is GIS more acute? Because there is no income threshold. In other words, they start counting the clawback of the benefit from $0, whereas for the Canada Child Benefit, they don't start counting any income until you reach $32,000. So that's why the clawbacks of the CCB have been much, much lighter, and for fewer people who are more poor, whereas the GIS, the 88,000 GIS recipients. So October 30th or October 23rd, as Laurel noted, is the recovery benefits ended. And those recipients in Ontario social assistance who were just receiving the drug and their $250 in benefits, their benefits would start to go back up. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. And then we're now, what I'm going to talk about is 5 bombs that are going to take place. Bomb number 1 is on December 1, when we see the new round of letters that go out to, and I've said CRB ineligibles. Yes, the last year CRA sent out 500,000 letters. They spent almost $500,000 in postage to tell people that they thought they were ineligible for the CRB. And as Laurel has noted, there might be as many as 1.7 million letters go out for people who were advanced money through the pandemic benefits, but then they worked or something else happened that made them ineligible in various months. And so they're going to be asked to pay back $1,000 or $2,000. I've said in my commentary, letters may or may not go out. It's now our understanding that those letters will go out. So that's bomb number 1. Bomb number 2 is the rent freeze and subsidized housing ends, as I said, and you will start to see people in subsidized RGI housing starting to see these rental increases where they start counting the pandemic income towards their rent. And the RGI is 30% of your income. So it's 30% of that with the various exemptions that they have, but we're going to start to see it. It's going to be very uneven, I predict, and but it could be coming to a municipality near you. The next bomb is the Groundhog Day on July the 1st, when we start to see the CRB benefits being counted against refundable credits. Will the government do something and not claw back those benefits? Will there be a CERB amnesty or a CRB amnesty? And then, of course, the GIS calculations, all the people, those 88,000 souls, if they continue to collect their Canada recovery benefits in that period, their GIS is going to go down. There's been no anything from the federal government to indicate anything other than that they would continue to claw back the GIS benefits. It's really quite horrible. It's my own comment on this. I think the messaging coming out from the new Minister of Seniors federally is just catastrophically misadvised. She said things that were there for the people with the lowest income. Well, they're hitting the people with the lowest income, the seniors that have to work beyond 65, and the ones who are collecting the most GIS are being hit the hardest, which means that the very poorest of the GIS recipients heard stories of people living in their cars in the Northwest Territories because they can't pay their rent. And then, of course, they've already had their rent increase because of the CRB. Some of them are seeing recovery rates on their benefit that actually exceed 100%. It's really quite horrible. So that's the fourth. That's the fourth bomb. And then finally, on December 1 next year, are we going to see a new round of letters go out to CRB ineligibles and also the ones that Laurel was talking about? Remember, CRA is an agency, and those letters in theory would still go out. They were not going to they would have to be reined in by the Ministry of Finance and by the Prime Minister. It's really they're really out there on their own as an agency, and they sort of set their own agenda. So let's just briefly go through social assistance and CERB and CRB. That was the first Canadian map where we had no CERB clawbacks in British Columbia, Northwest Territories, and Yukon Territory. And the earnings exemptions for social assistance were extended in Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, and Alberta. And a few provinces in one territory, Nunavut, had a full CRB CERB clawback. But when we moved to the CERB, all of the provinces and territories, except for British Columbia, undertook a full Canada Recovery Benefit clawback. So in other words, as we got deeper into pandemic benefits and as the recovery benefit came in place, the provinces and territories actually solidified their position in terms of clawing back the full amount of the CERB. So for the CERB, it was a $900 clawback in each and every case. And so for some clients went into what I call negative entitlement because their allowances weren't as high as $900, but they did keep the $2.50 check. And that's something that Todd Smith as minister did, so that they at least kept them on. And this occurred, so this would allow people to get their benefits. Again, I'm going to go through these slides rather fast and allow you to read them on your own time in the interest of time and not getting too deep into the weeds. But what the $2.50 gets you is not everything. It gets you prescription drugs, it gets you dental benefits, diabetic supplies, the client contribution to ADP, which is very important, medical transport, batteries and repairs for mobility devices, eye exams, dog guide, employment startup, upfront childcare, and other specified benefits under mandatory special necessities. But it doesn't get you everything. What it doesn't get you, and really important, that special diet allowances are included in the allowance structure. They're not benefits outside of the allowance. So it's really important that you know that special diet allowances, northern allowances for First Nations and remote communities, pregnancy diets, special supporter allowances, and emergency assistance don't apply. So if you got the $2.50 check, you're not going to get any of those. So that's an important thing just for people to know. So there was a number of people who went into negative entitlement, but the bottom line is that the people who went into negative entitlement were those who overall benefit were, their entitlements were lower than 900. And then when the CRB came along, almost everybody would go in because almost no one except for ODSP larger families would have an entitlement of more than $2,000. So only certain clients were thrown into negative entitlement. And so people, it's really important that you know, as we go back and we start to regularize things post-pandemic, is that for some clients, they will simply have their benefits go back up and they will start to receive their regular benefits again, while others who are actually taken off the program or who left the programs would have to reapply. And just remember, one of the most important things is that they won't have their earnings exemptions applied until they've been on until they qualify for the program. Okay. And so some people who would have been eligible before, they go off the program, they try to get back on and they can't get on because they're continuing to work. So just very briefly on other social assistance issues, we've heard about the issues of overpayments because people of money that they receive beforehand. Clients, and there's been a number of situations that I'll acknowledge that people would have to work out with their local offices, and especially it can be compound complex because you've got people who, you know, about 12% of people receiving ODSP are also in subsidized housing, and you see issues that come there. So I'm just going to go through this a little quicker. I wanted to stop just briefly on honorariums and honorariums because a lot of social assistance clients who are active in many different ways as volunteers, or if they are also involved in work, will be receiving honorariums. Just remember that the threshold for a T4A, and this is a double-edged sword, that the honorarium income counts towards the $5,000 threshold, but CRA does not necessarily know that a lot of clients that are getting honorariums. I know of situations, one woman on ODSP that got honorariums of $3,400, but never received a T4A. She qualifies for the CERB, but she got a letter saying that she didn't qualify for it because CRA did not know about it. So it's important that people include their honorarium income for qualifying for CERB and CRB. And there's also the situation that honorarium income could put you over the amounts that would allow you to receive CRB and CERB, and therefore work the other way. So in many ways, the CERB and the CRB, although it was quickly designed, got a lot of things out the door very quickly. At the same time, a lot of double-edged swords in here, and especially for honorariums and for clients that didn't keep receipts and didn't keep records because they thought they were getting money out of a cash box and it wouldn't mean anything. All of a sudden, that's really important in meeting their $5,000 threshold to get the CERB or the CRB. So I've given a few examples here. I'm going to leave these with you. It's we don't, in the interest of time, but these will allow you to see the various different ways that the honorariums cut both ways. And there's confusion concerning honorariums because they help people get on, but it also can disqualify them. And remember that any honorarium below $500 from a particular source does not necessarily attract the T4A, so they had to keep their own records. And I don't think people were generally doing that. So let me just end here with the guaranteed income supplement. It has clawbacks from $1, unlike the child benefits where the clawbacks start at $32,000 a year. And so that's why you're going to hear a lot more about GIS and you're going to hear about the child benefits, even though you will hear about it from people who have more than who have two children or more and whose income is modest. The government of Canada confiscated at least 50% of each dollar in CERB and CRB from GIS recipients for the simple reason that these pandemic benefits were designed as taxable benefits. So the government, as a policy matter, looked at the pedigree of the benefit. Whoops, it's on line 130. It gets a T4A. Couldn't possibly change our policies. I guess I'm being a bit sarcastic here. So the GIS clawback starts from $0 for CERB and CRB income. And so if somebody got $12,000 in CRB, this would result in a clawback of around $6,000. And the average clawback, according to the parliamentary budget officer, was $4,977. So this is catastrophic. This is people who had no idea that this money was going to come off their benefits. And at the same time, many of those people were living in subsidized housing and they got hit with a rent increase that they weren't able to cover. And so it's these people in that very acute minority of people, but who are just catastrophically hit by the CERB. They actually paid more in clawbacks than they received in the pandemic benefits in the first place. So there's a $5,000 GIS for GIS recipients in earnings, but you remember they allow the $5,000 earnings exemption for T4s, but not for T4A. So in other words, the government is in effect saying to the 1% of our poor seniors that work that we will allow your earnings at $5,000 to be exempt. But if the government replaces the income with the pandemic benefits, they're going to claw back 2,500 of it. So we'll leave it to them to decide how, and the new seniors minister, how long they'll be able to go with this project. So all other pandemic benefits except the CERB and CRB were paid out as refundable credits, as opposed to taxable benefits where there's no clawback. And the federal government, it seems, singled out poor working seniors for the single largest benefit, clawbacks, and did so on one of its own programs, even though they told the provinces to treat social to exempt the CERB for social assistance. So it's a real case of do what we say, not what we do. Okay, I'll leave it at that. And I think we got a bit more than 15 minutes left for questions.
Thank you so much, John. Wow, I think there's a lot of commentary in the chat about you knowing your stuff, and that is for sure. It's why you're here today, but also a lot of commentary in the chat about, yeah, just the difficulty this is going to throw a lot of people already struggling into in the coming months. So we do have questions for you. First question, John. I heard CRA is charging 0% interest on CRA debt until April 30th, 2022. Is that all CRA debt or just COVID benefit debt?
I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I'd assume that it would specifically apply. Let's assume that it's going to specifically apply to the pandemic benefit debt and possibly other debt that's related to refundable credits. It probably would not apply to somebody who has been found guilty of some charge under our tax regime and had to pay money back and was fined. So I doubt that they would allow an interest holiday on fines, but certainly on this side of things, I would assume that's the case. Really good question.
Yeah, you're right, John. It is only on COVID-related benefits. For 2020, there is any interest for 2020. There is a relief, but however, there could be a penalty for late filing late. So it's important people actually file it on time.
Yeah.
So here's another question about CERB. What happens if a senior decides to pay back CERB? What would happen to their GIS payments?
That's really intriguing. So their GIS would go up, but since the clawback is 50%, they would be paying 100% of the benefit back. So if someone, so paying back the CERB usually would only happen in situations where one was ineligible for the CERB. There's no point in paying it back if you're eligible for it because the clawback is 50%, it's not 100%. So, but in that instance where someone was ineligible in the first place, and it's really easy to get it wrong. For example, let's say you had $4,500 in earnings, you're counting up your receipts, you're looking at your T4, and then you say, hey, you know, I helped out at the church and I helped out at my community center, and I count up my receipts as being about $700. So I'm 5,200, so I'm eligible for this thing, but then CRA tells you you're ineligible. It's really, really, so if someone was found ineligible and completely with no fault of their own, and then decided to pay back the CERB, then in fact, they could have an adjustment in their tax form and their GIS should be returned to them, but it wouldn't be as much because the clawback is not 100%.
Thanks for that, John. Someone is asking, many have lost the Ontario electricity rebate due to an increase in their notice of assessment income from CERB. Any comments on that?
Yeah, really, that's although I didn't include it in the slide, but it's any form of refundable credit, whether it's the Canada Child Benefit, whether it's the Canada Workers Benefit, and of course, any provincial benefits like the Trillium, which includes the electricity. It can include the carbon benefit, although the carbon benefit is not income tested, but any income tested benefit. The way the tax system works is when you enter income on page 1 of that tax return, and that's where the CERB and the CRB go, it can reduce your eligibility for refundable credits. That's how the system works. So in other words, even though refundable credits you get even though you don't pay tax, and you're eligible for them even if you don't pay tax, is they are determined according to your income, and they use something called adjusted family net income, otherwise known as AFNI. We all call it AFNI, adjusted family net income, which is line 236 or 23,600 of the new tax return, but it's the old line 236. That's the number that you look at, and line 236 includes the CERB, and that's the number that determines the value of your refundable credits. So yes, indeed, you can lose any refundable credit as part of this, but all the refundable credits have different thresholds. Some of them will protect people who are living in poverty, others will not because they come in at $0.
All right, thank you for that. This question has come in a few different forms. I'm going to read this one out to John or to anyone on the panel. So I work with several seniors who've been working prior to COVID and therefore collected CERB. They're now realizing they don't qualify for GIS because CERB increased their income for 2020. Some have received eviction notices because their income is so low, they can now not afford to pay rent. So the question, there's a few iterations of that question. Is there anything that can be done for these individuals? Service Canada simply states that they have to wait until next year and reapply for GIS. Is there anything they can do?
Well, there is a provision that allows them to apply. Apparently there's about 5,000 who have applied to have their income reassessed, and they will look at the time period over which the income was done. But to me, that's mostly a cruel joke. That reassessment is not going to do much of anything for most of the people who are in the situations I talk about. And again, I think the most egregious are not even in Ontario. It's in the Northwest Territories where much higher percentage of people are living in subsidized housing, and where the cold weather has people being evicted from these premises, who are literally now living in their cars and are facing a winter without housing. And it seems to me that the new minister, who was born in 1989, so she has a little bit of education to get from us, I think, and say that what they are doing is catastrophically inept. I just can't get into how the superlatives I would need to tell you just how unfeeling and horrible this policy is. It's much worse, really, than what happened to social assistance recipients in many respects.
So would completing a statement of income report, maybe this is what you've just alluded to. Yeah, is that we're assisted in having GIS increased after being clawed back from receiving the CERB? That's it.
It's worth doing.
Yeah.
It's worth trying, and for some it will work, for others it will not. But I think in the long run, when we're talking about the 88,000 souls who have been affected by this, and those, remember, the very poorest of them have had the biggest clawback. Because that's, again, if you only receive a couple of $100 in GIS in the first place, so you're only on for a bit of GIS, the most you can lose is a couple of $100. But if you're getting the full GIS and have no CPP, no investment income, no pension, those are the people who are hit the hardest. And that is exactly opposite to what the minister's messaging, saying what we are really here to do is to help the poorest seniors. So it is completely 100% at odds with the word salad messaging that's coming out of the federal government at this time. And that's why the CERB amnesty and in the new year. And I think another point that I should make is that all throughout the last couple of years, anybody who suffered a clawback, whether on social assistance or they had a rent increase, or if their GIS was cut, at least they had the fallback of their pandemic benefits were continuing to be paid, as Laurel said, up to October 23rd. 2022 is a whole new ball game where no one has any of these pandemic benefits except for these small programs that Reggie and Laurel talked about, but no CERB, no CRB, none of the big programs, but they're going to suffer the clawbacks without having any other pandemic income to offset it with.
Thanks for that. And there is someone commenting that they've worked with their MP office on the GIS issue and that statement of income form is part of the review. So it's good if people get active and push their representatives. Laurel, this is a question for you. Will there be any supports for small business owners or for small landlords?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm just going to quote from a news release that came out about a week ago, not even that, as they announced, government announced various things. And it kind of frames what we're dealing with now on many fronts. And that is, they say, last month, the government announced it is pivoting from broad-based economic support to targeted measures that provide support where it is needed in order to create jobs and growth and prudently manage government spending. So that's the frame for them on many of these things. Now, again, we should never take these things lying down. I mean, this is really a moving target, and we need to keep the pressure up. But that's the current thinking, and that went into what they did on the business subsidy side as well as on the benefit side for individuals. So they ended the wage subsidy, which was the favorite a program for many employers, including smaller employers, and also the rent subsidy program. They announced instead that the Canada Recovery Hiring Program, which was the least favorite program of business, it existed before, that one they were going to move up to the front burner, modify it slightly, and extend it through to May 7th, 2022. Now, that is part of what's now being debated today and in the next few weeks in Parliament in Bill C2. This is the Canada Recovery Hiring Program. Now, just in case you are dealing with smaller businesses that have employees, note that in spite of the name that says hiring subsidy, it can be used for other purposes, including bringing back, recalling workers that might even now still be on layoff, or increasing the hours of employees currently at work. So it's actually covering more ground than the naming of it would suggest. They have also announced 3 streams. They say they're going to create a broader support, including some rental supports, but at this point restricted to tourism and hospitality recovery. And now that does include, though, restaurants, travel agencies, and so on, as well as hotels. I'm not going to go into the detail, just to say that there is a special program designed there. There is another one for what they call hardest hit business recovery program. I'm not going to pretend to know the details. And then there's the lockdown benefit, and Reggie explained that applies to applies to nobody right now as it's designed. So they're like with the other benefits, they're scaling it way back, and it's going to take a lot of organizing if anybody wants to change that agenda. Oh, let me just add that in slide 20 of the PowerPoint that Reggie and I had on EI and recovery benefits, on page 20 under resources, one of the links is to the Service Canada overview of benefits, COVID-related benefits, and it includes the links there once you get there to the business small employer sites.
Okay, thank you so much, Laurel and John and Reggie. We have 1 minute left, and I think we have to wrap up. So I apologize to those of you who have questions that we couldn't get to. We may be able to answer them at a later time. I'm going to provide my email address at the end of the slides. If you want to send in your question, we can see if we could answer those. Irouge, I'm wondering if you could bring up our slides. So as I said, we've provided resources throughout the slides, both Laurel and Reggie and John. We have some more for you here. Again, we recommend you contact your local community legal clinic if you do need support in trying to apply for benefits, or if someone's really stuck. The Workers Action Centre hotline can help you out or can refer you. Up in Northwest Ontario, there's the Sudbury Workers Education and Action Centre, and they've said they are also supporting people with income assistance. CLEO Connect's inventory tool, which is an overview of resources and supports in 4 areas, has a section on income benefits during COVID-19. And for those of you who had questions about employment and EI and vaccinations, you can refer back to our last webinar on November 4th, which is around vaccinations and COVID-19. And the clinic where Reggie works has videos explaining the earlier rules on EI, CERB, and 3 recovery benefits. And I believe there's some of that information is in Tamil. So those are excellent to go back for reference. Next slide. And this is the form that was mentioned a couple of times for the CRA form, request for taxpayer relief to cancel or waive penalties and interest. That's that there. We said at the beginning, this is a moving target. There's so much information coming at us. John's blog here has a lot of information on the changes, what to expect. So if you want to keep on top of this information, this is an excellent resource. Someone had mentioned in the chat also, the Income Security Advocacy Clinic has a campaign to stop the GIS from being clawed back for the poorest seniors. This link is here. And we have a couple of free services here for folks who are looking at debt, credit counseling. Those are all nonprofits. Next slide, please. And finally, we have our Steps to Justice website here. I'm sorry, I keep losing my screen, so apologize for the glitchiness. So this is our Steps to Justice homepage, and you can see that we've added this red bar. This is everything that's COVID related. Next slide, please. So these are the kinds of questions you can find in Steps to Justice, or in French as well, in Justice Pas à Pas. And so we have a whole section on COVID-19 and income assistance, EI benefits during COVID-19, and those are regularly updated. We've also provided on the next slide some media coverage for you. Again, on John's blog, there's a lot of his contributions to these kinds of efforts to stop the clawbacks and the paybacks. And next slide. For those of you, again, we mentioned interested in taking action around truth and reconciliation, supporting Indigenous communities. These links are for you. And finally, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for joining us. And we hope that we've provided you with at least a good overview today. We definitely will be back with more details. I think we're hearing that there's maybe small smaller sections that we need to pull out that maybe we could focus on, please send us your ideas. For that, thanks so much, Reggie, Laurel, and John. You've been excellent. Thanks for sharing all your time and the work that you do outside of this webinar. And thanks to my colleagues, Brenda and Aruj, for your role today. And especially thank you to all of our participants who are out there doing the hard work on the ground. Please contact me if you have any further questions or issues, and we'll be sending you a survey for your feedback. So thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.